The fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital's psychiatric ward hummed with their familiar persistence as Dr. Elena Rodriguez made her final rounds of the evening shift. At 34, she had learned to read the subtle language of institutional lighting, the way it flickered when the building's electrical system strained, the harsh shadows it cast across patient rooms, the sterile uniformity that somehow made everything feel both safe and isolating. Tonight, like so many nights before, she moved through the corridors with the practiced efficiency of someone who had found her calling in the most challenging corners of healthcare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her colleagues often wondered how she managed to maintain such composure in the face of the ward's daily struggles. Veterans with PTSD, combat survivors wrestling with invisible wounds, service members whose minds had been shattered by experiences most civilians couldn't comprehend. Elena had developed a reputation for being the doctor who never gave up, who saw potential for healing even in the most damaged souls. What they didn't know was that her dedication came from a place of deep personal understanding, a connection to military service that ran through her family like a river of shared sacrifice. Elena's father, Master Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment before an IED explosion ended his career and left him with traumatic brain injury. She had been a sophomore in pre-med at the University of California, San Diego when the call came from Walter Reed Medical Center. The months that followed had been a masterclass in navigating the Veterans Affairs system, watching a proud warrior struggle with memory loss and emotional regulation, and seeing firsthand how the military healthcare system could fail those who had given everything for their country. That experience had shaped every aspect of her medical career. Elena specialized in treating combat veterans not because it was a lucrative field, it decidedly wasn't, but because she understood the unique challenges these men and women faced. She spoke their language, recognized their symptoms, and most importantly, she never judged them for the invisible wounds they carried. Her approach combined clinical expertise with genuine empathy, creating a safe space where hardened warriors could lower their defenses and begin the difficult work of healing. Tonight's shift had been particularly challenging. 3 new admissions. All veterans, all struggling with different manifestations of post-traumatic stress. Elena had spent extra time with each one, ensuring they felt heard and understood before settling them into their rooms. It was past 9 p.m. when she finally made her way to the nursing station to complete her paperwork, the hospital's evening quiet settling around her like a familiar blanket. The encounter. The man sitting in the waiting area looked like he had been carved from stone, and exhaustion in equal measure. Even in his civilian clothes, worn jeans, a flannel shirt that had seen better days, and work boots that spoke of honest labor, there was something unmistakably military about his bearing. His posture was rigidly upright despite the obvious fatigue in his eyes, and his hands rested on his knees with the disciplined stillness of someone trained to wait without complaint. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena noticed him immediately. In her years of working with veterans, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot former service members in civilian settings. It was in the way they carried themselves, the systematic way they surveyed their surroundings, the careful control they maintained over their expressions. This man possessed all those qualities, but there was something else, a rawness in his expression that suggested he was fighting a losing battle against demons that had followed him home. She approached the desk where Linda Morrison, the evening charge nurse, was reviewing patient charts. Linda had been at Mercy General for over 15 years, a fixture in the psychiatric ward who had seen every type of crisis the human mind could produce. She was known for her efficiency and her ability to handle difficult situations with a combination of professionalism and genuine care. The gentleman in the waiting area, Elena said quietly, nodding toward the man. Has he been waiting long? Linda glanced up from her paperwork, following Elena's gaze. About an hour. Says he doesn't have insurance but needs to talk to someone. I told him about the sliding scale payment program, but he seems more interested in just talking to someone who understands. Elena studied the man more carefully. Late 30s, perhaps early 40s, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of outdoor work and hard living. His eyes, when they briefly met hers across the room, held the particular shade of weariness she recognized in so many of her patients. It was the exhaustion that came not from physical labor but from carrying invisible burdens that never seemed to get lighter. What's his name? Elena asked. Marcus Thompson. Says he's a veteran, did multiple tours in Iraq. Lost his job last month, behind on rent, and Linda hesitated, consulting her notes. He mentioned something about not wanting to be a burden on his family anymore. The usual red flags. Elena felt her chest tighten. She had heard variations of this story countless times, veterans who had served their country with honor only to find themselves struggling with civilian life, battling demons that followed them home from foreign battlefields. The statistics were heartbreaking: 22 veteran suicides per day, unemployment rates higher than the general population, homelessness, addiction, and 1,000 other challenges that society seemed content to ignore once the parades were over. "I'll talk to him," Elena said, though she knew it would mean staying well past her shift's end. "Can you set up room 3? Linda nodded, already reaching for the key. "You sure? Your shift ended an hour ago, and you've been here since 6 this morning." "I'm sure," Elena replied, her voice carrying the quiet conviction that had defined her career. Some things are more important than shift schedules. The session room 3 was designed for comfort rather than clinical efficiency. Soft lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence of the main ward, and the furniture was arranged to encourage conversation rather than maintain institutional distance. Elena had advocated for this setup during her first year at Mercy General, arguing that veterans needed spaces that felt safe rather than sterile. The hospital administration had initially resisted the expense, but the improved patient outcomes had eventually won them over. Marcus Thompson entered the room with the cautious movements of someone who had learned to expect ambush from any situation. He glanced around quickly, noting the exits, the positioning of the furniture, the sight lines through the single window. Elena recognized the behavior. Hypervigilance was a common symptom among combat veterans, an adaptive response to dangerous environments that became maladaptive in civilian settings. "Please, have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Elena said, settling into her chair with deliberate casualness. She had learned early in her career that veterans responded better to informal interactions than clinical formality. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez, but you can call me Elena if you prefer." Marcus chose the chair closest to the door, positioning himself so he could see both the entrance and the window. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice carrying the controlled cadence of someone who had learned to speak carefully. "I know it's late, and I know I don't have insurance, but I didn't know where else to go." "You're exactly where you need to be," Elena assured him. "Why don't you tell me a little about yourself? I understand you're a veteran." The question seemed to unlock something in Marcus. For the next hour, his story unfolded with the halting rhythm of someone who had been carrying these experiences alone for far too long. He had enlisted in the army straight out of high school, following his father's footsteps into military service. For tours in Iraq with the 101st Airborne, including some of the heaviest fighting in Fallujah and Ramadi. He had been a squad leader, responsible for the lives of younger soldiers who looked to him for guidance and protection. "I brought most of them home," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Most of them. But the ones I didn't, they're the ones I think about every night." Elena listened without interruption, recognizing the sacred nature of what Marcus was sharing. Combat veterans rarely spoke openly about their experiences, especially the moments that haunted them most. She had learned that her role in these conversations was not to offer solutions or interpretations but simply to bear witness to experiences that civilian society preferred to ignore. Marcus described the incident that had shattered his world. An IED explosion that had killed 2 of his soldiers and left him with a traumatic brain injury that ended his military career. The physical wounds had healed, but the psychological damage ran deeper than any medical scan could reveal. He talked about the guilt that followed him like a shadow, the way everyday sounds could trigger flashbacks, the growing sense that he had somehow failed the men who had trusted him with their lives. "I've been seeing a VA counselor," Marcus continued, "but it's not helping. The appointments are months apart, and when I do get to see someone, it feels like they're just going through the motions. I need to talk to someone who understands what it's like to be responsible for other people's lives." Elena nodded, understanding the frustration in his voice. The VA system, despite its best intentions, was overwhelmed and understaffed. Veterans like Marcus often fell through the cracks, their needs too complex for the standardized treatment protocols designed for efficiency rather than effectiveness. "You mentioned losing your job," Elena said gently. "Can you tell me about that?" Marcus's expression darkened. "I was working construction, commercial projects mostly. Good pay, good crew, but the stress was getting to me. I started having episodes. Flashbacks during loud noises, panic attacks when I felt trapped in enclosed spaces. My foreman was understanding at first, but when it started affecting my work." He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. "What happened?" Elena asked. "I snapped at a younger guy on the crew. He was just being careless, not following safety protocols, and I saw one of my soldiers in him. I grabbed him, started yelling about how his carelessness could get people killed. I scared him, scared myself. The company said I was a liability, that they couldn't have someone unstable working on their sites." Elena felt anger rising in her chest, not at Marcus, but at a system that failed to understand how military training and combat experience could translate into civilian workplaces with the right support and understanding. Instead of seeing Marcus's leadership experience and commitment to safety as assets, his employer had discarded him at the first sign of struggle. "How are you managing financially?" she asked. "I'm not," Marcus admitted. "Unemployment benefits don't cover much, and I've been too proud to ask for help. My wife works at a daycare center, but that's barely enough to keep us afloat. We're 2 months behind on rent, and I can see the stress eating at her." She married a soldier, not a broken man who can't hold down a job. The session continued for another hour, with Marcus sharing details about his family, his struggles with sleep and concentration, and the growing sense that his life was spiraling out of control. Elena found herself deeply moved by his story, recognizing in him the same qualities that had made her father such an exceptional soldier: leadership, dedication, and a profound sense of responsibility for others. The decision as the session drew to a close, Elena faced a decision that would change both their lives. Marcus clearly needed ongoing support, but he had no insurance and no means to pay for private therapy. The VA system had failed him, and Mercy General's charity care program was already stretched thin. According to hospital policy, she should refer him to community resources and hope for the best, but Elena had never been one to follow policy when it conflicted with her conscience. "Marcus, I want to see you again next week," she said, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even her. "Same time, same place." Marcus looked up sharply. "I can't pay for regular sessions, Dr. Rodriguez." "I wish I could, but we'll figure out the payment later," Elena interrupted. "Right now, what matters is getting you the help you need. I'm going to work with you on developing some coping strategies, and we'll explore some options for longer-term care." The relief in Marcus's eyes was immediate and profound. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Thank you is exactly enough," Elena replied. "You served your country with honor, and you deserve to be treated with the same honor now. That's not negotiable." After Marcus left, Elena sat alone in room 3, processing the evening's conversation. She knew she was taking a risk by agreeing to treat him without proper financial arrangements. Mercy General was a private hospital, not a charity, and her supervisors would not appreciate her making unauthorized commitments of time and resources, but she also knew that some decisions transcended policy and procedure. Marcus Thompson was a man who had given everything for his country and received broken promises in return. If the system wouldn't help him, then she would find a way to help him herself. Elena made her way back to the nursing station, where Linda was finishing her shift notes. The waiting area was empty now, but she could still picture Marcus sitting there with his soldier's posture and his wounded eyes. "Everything okay?" Linda asked, noticing Elena's thoughtful expression. "Define okay." Elena replied, settling into her chair to complete her documentation. "We've got a veteran who needs help, no insurance, and a system that's failing him. Pretty much a typical Tuesday night." Linda nodded knowingly. She had seen Elena take on difficult cases before, often going above and beyond what was expected or required. "You're going to help him anyway, aren't you?" "I'm going to try," Elena said, her fingers already working on the keyboard. "Sometimes trying is all we can do." The pattern emerges over the next 6 weeks. Elena's sessions with Marcus became a bright spot in both their schedules. She met with him every Tuesday evening, after her regular shift ended, using room 3 as their informal therapy space. Marcus responded well to her approach, which combined clinical techniques with the kind of straightforward communication he was used to from his military days. Elena helped him develop coping strategies for his PTSD symptoms, teaching him breathing techniques to manage panic attacks and grounding exercises to interrupt flashbacks. More importantly, she helped him understand that his experiences were normal responses to abnormal situations, that seeking help was a sign of strength rather than weakness. Marcus began to stabilize. His sleep improved, his panic attacks became less frequent, and he started to regain some of his confidence. Elena connected him with a veterans job placement program, and he found work with a smaller construction company whose owner was also a veteran and understood the unique challenges facing former service members, but their sessions didn't go unnoticed. Elena was careful to schedule them after hours and to document them appropriately, but hospital administration was becoming aware of her pro bono work. She had treated 3 other veterans on similar unofficial arrangements, and word was spreading through the veteran community that Dr. Rodriguez was someone who would help regardless of their ability to pay. Dr. Richard Hartley, the hospital's chief of psychiatry, was a man who viewed medicine through the lens of efficiency and profitability. He had been at Mercy General for over 20 years, climbing the administrative ladder through a combination of political savvy and an ability to maximize revenue streams. He was not inherently unsympathetic to patient needs, but he believed that financial sustainability was a prerequisite for helping anyone. "Elena, we need to discuss your recent patient load," Dr. Hartley said during their monthly review meeting. "I'm seeing a pattern of uninsured veterans receiving extended care without proper financial arrangements." Elena had been expecting this conversation. "Dr. Hartley, these are men and women who served our country. They deserve access to mental health care, regardless of their financial situation." "I understand your compassion," Hartley replied, "but we're running a business, not a charity. The hospital has policies about charity care, and there are proper channels for that. You can't just decide on your own to provide free treatment." "The charity care program has a 6-month waiting list," Elena countered. "These veterans need help now, not 6 months from now. Some of them are suicidal, Dr. Hartley. Are we really going to let billing policies determine who lives and dies?" The argument continued for another 20 minutes, with Elena defending her actions and Hartley expressing concerns about setting precedents and maintaining financial viability. They reached an uncomfortable compromise. Elena could continue treating her current veteran patients, but she needed to be more careful about taking on new cases without proper authorization. Elena left the meeting feeling frustrated but not defeated. She had bought time for Marcus and her other veteran patients, and she would continue to advocate for them through proper channels. What she didn't know was that Dr. Hartley had already begun documenting their conversation, building a file that would later be used to justify more drastic action. The expansion word of Elena's work with veterans spread through informal networks with the speed that only military communities could achieve. Veterans talked to other veterans, who talked to their families, who talked to their friends. Within weeks, Elena was receiving calls from across the state, veterans seeking help and hoping she might be able to provide the care they couldn't find elsewhere. She tried to refer most of them to appropriate resources, but some cases demanded immediate attention. A Marine corporal who had been struggling with alcoholism since returning from Afghanistan. A female Army sergeant dealing with military sexual trauma and PTSD. A Special Forces veteran whose nightmares had become so severe that he hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in months. Elena found herself working longer hours, staying late most evenings to accommodate patients who couldn't afford traditional therapy. She developed an informal network of colleagues who would help when they could, and she started a small fund using her own money to help veterans with immediate needs, rent assistance, medication costs, emergency food supplies. Linda Morrison became her unofficial partner in this effort, helping to schedule appointments and coordinate care. Other nurses and staff members began volunteering their time as well, moved by the stories they heard and the dedication Elena showed to her patients. "You're building something special here," Linda observed one evening as they prepared room 3 for another session. "I've never seen patients respond to treatment the way these veterans do with you. They just need someone who understands," Elena replied, arranging the familiar chairs. "Someone who won't judge them for their struggles or treat them like they're broken beyond repair." Marcus Thompson had become one of her success stories. His job was going well, his relationship with his wife had improved, and he was sleeping through the night most evenings. More importantly, he had connected with other veterans in Elena's informal network, forming friendships that provided ongoing support beyond their therapy sessions. "Dr. Rodriguez saved my life," Marcus had told Linda one evening while waiting for his appointment. "I was ready to give up when I walked into this place. She didn't just treat my symptoms, she helped me remember who I was before the war messed with my head." But Elena's growing reputation among veterans was also drawing attention from hospital administration. Dr. Hartley was receiving pressure from the hospital's board of directors about the financial impact of her unauthorized charity work. More concerning, he was getting complaints from other physicians who felt that Elena's freelance approach was setting unrealistic expectations about what the hospital could provide. The situation came to a head when Elena received a call from Captain James Mitchell, a Navy SEAL veteran who had been medically retired after a training accident left him with chronic pain and severe PTSD. Mitchell was desperate. He had been through multiple treatment programs without success, and his wife was threatening to leave him if he didn't get help. "I've heard you're the only doctor who really understands what we go through," Mitchell said during their phone conversation. "I can't afford private treatment, and the VA has been useless. I'm at the end of my rope here." Elena agreed to see him, despite knowing that adding another high-need patient to her caseload would push her unofficial program beyond what she could sustain. Mitchell's case would prove to be the catalyst that transformed her quiet act of compassion into a confrontation with institutional power. As she prepared for their first session, Elena reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. She had entered medicine to help people, but she had found herself caught between the noble ideals of her profession and the harsh realities of a healthcare system that too often prioritized profit over patients. The veterans she treated didn't see her as a rebel or a troublemaker. They saw her as someone who had kept faith with them when society had forgotten its promises. That faith would soon be tested in ways she couldn't have imagined, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately reveal the true meaning of loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. Tomorrow evening, Captain Mitchell would arrive for his appointment, carrying with him not just his own struggles but connections to a brotherhood that never forgot its own. Elena had no way of knowing that helping this one veteran would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the price of doing what was right. The SEAL's arrival. Captain James Mitchell arrived at Mercy General on a rain-soaked Thursday evening in November, his presence immediately distinguishing him from the typical patients who frequented the psychiatric ward. Even in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a simple black jacket, and worn combat boots, there was an unmistakable aura of controlled intensity about him. His movements were economical and purposeful, his eyes constantly scanning the environment. With the hypervigilance of someone trained to identify threats in milliseconds, Elena noticed him immediately as she finished her regular shift. He sat in the waiting area with the rigid posture she had come to recognize in special operations veterans, back straight, hands positioned for quick movement, positioned to observe both entrances and exits. But unlike the other veterans she had treated, Mitchell carried himself with an additional weight of authority, the bearing of someone who had led men in the most dangerous missions imaginable. Captain Mitchell? Elena approached him with the respectful directness she had learned worked best with elite military personnel. He stood immediately, his movement fluid despite the obvious tension in his frame. Dr. Rodriguez. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this is outside normal channels. Those channels haven't been working for people like you, Elena replied, gesturing toward room 3. Let's talk. As they settled into the familiar chairs, Elena observed Mitchell more carefully. Late 30s, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years in harsh environments. His hands bore the scars of someone who had worked with weapons and explosives, and there was a controlled stillness about him that suggested coiled energy barely held in check. Tell me about your service, Elena began, using the same approach that had worked with her other veteran patients. Mitchell's story unfolded with the precision of a military briefing, but Elena could hear the pain beneath the controlled narrative. 12 years as a Navy SEAL, including multiple deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and several classified operations he couldn't discuss. Team leader on high-value target missions, responsible for the lives of America's most elite warriors in the most dangerous operations the military conducted. I was good at my job, Mitchell said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had proven himself in situations most people couldn't imagine. Really good. My team trusted me, and I brought them home. Every mission, every time. Until the training accident had happened stateside, during a complex maritime operation. Equipment failure, split-second decisions, and the kind of chaos that could turn routine preparation into catastrophe. Mitchell had been injured, chronic back pain, traumatic brain injury, and the end of a military career that had defined his entire adult life. The physical injuries, I could handle, Mitchell continued. But losing my team, losing my purpose, that's what broke me. I went from being someone who mattered, who had a mission, to being a medical retirement statistic. Elena listened as Mitchell described the familiar downward spiral she had seen in so many veterans. Failed attempts at civilian employment, growing isolation from friends and family, increasing reliance on pain medication, and the gradual erosion of self-worth that came with feeling useless after years of serving a vital purpose. My wife Sarah. She's been incredible, Mitchell said, his voice softening. But I can see what this is doing to her. She married a SEAL, not a broken man who can't get out of bed some mornings. She deserves better than what I've become. The breakthrough session. Over the next 2 hours, Elena worked with Mitchell using techniques she had refined through years of treating special operations veterans. She understood that traditional therapy approaches often failed with elite military personnel because they were trained to compartmentalize trauma and maintain operational effectiveness under extreme stress. Instead, she spoke his language, direct, honest, focused on mission-oriented goals rather than emotional processing. She helped him understand that his symptoms were normal responses to abnormal stress, that seeking help was a tactical decision rather than a sign of weakness. You're not broken, Elena told him as their session neared its end. You're a precision instrument that needs recalibration. The skills that made you an exceptional SEAL are still there, we just need to help you adapt them to civilian life. Mitchell responded to her approach with the same intensity he had once brought to military operations. By the end of their session, he had developed a preliminary action plan for managing his symptoms and was scheduled for weekly follow-up appointments. I can't pay for regular sessions, Mitchell said as he prepared to leave. The military retirement. Doesn't cover much, and Sarah's teaching salary, we'll figure it out, Elena assured him, using the same words she had used with Marcus Thompson and her other veteran patients. Right now, what matters is getting you stable. After Mitchell left, Elena sat alone in room 3, processing the evening session. She knew she was taking on another patient she couldn't officially afford to treat, further expanding her unauthorized charity work. But she also knew that men like Mitchell represented the very best of America's military, and abandoning them to bureaucratic indifference was unacceptable. What she didn't know was that Dr. Hartley had been monitoring her sessions more closely than she realized, and that her decision to treat Captain Mitchell would trigger a chain of events that would force her to choose between her career and her conscience. The investigation. 3 weeks after Mitchell's first appointment, Elena received a call from Dr. Hartley requesting an immediate meeting. She found him in his office along with Patricia Winters, the hospital's chief financial officer, and David Chen, the director of risk management. The formal setup immediately put her on alert. Dr. Rodriguez, we need to discuss your recent patient activities, Dr. Hartley began, his tone more serious than she had ever heard it. We've been reviewing your case files, and we have significant concerns about your unauthorized charity work. Patricia Winters opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the conference table. You're currently treating 12 veterans without proper financial arrangements, accumulating over $45,000 in unpaid services. This represents a serious breach of hospital policy and fiduciary responsibility. Elena felt her stomach tighten as she reviewed the documents. Seeing her compassionate work reduced to financial statistics felt like a betrayal of everything she had tried to accomplish. These are veterans who need help, Elena said, her voice steady despite her growing anxiety. Men and women who served our country and deserve access to mental health care. That's not your decision to make, David Chen interjected. The hospital has established procedures for charity care, and you've circumvented all of them. More concerning, you've created liability issues. What happens if one of these patients has a crisis? What happens if they sue the hospital? Dr. Hartley leaned forward, his expression grim. Elena, I've tried to be understanding about your dedication to veteran care, but this has gone too far. You're putting the hospital at risk, and you're setting expectations we can't meet. We need you to terminate these unauthorized relationships immediately. I can't do that, Elena replied, her voice gaining strength. These patients are making progress. Some of them are suicidal. If I abandon them now, people could die. Then refer them to appropriate resources, Patricia Winters said coldly. The VA, community mental health centers, other providers who can work within established systems. Those systems are failing them, Elena shot back. The VA has 6-month waiting lists. Community centers don't understand military trauma. These veterans need specialized care now, not bureaucratic referrals. The argument continued for another 30 minutes, with Elena defending her actions and the administration demanding compliance with hospital policies. Finally, Dr. Hartley delivered an ultimatum that changed everything. Dr. Rodriguez, you have 2 choices. You can immediately terminate your unauthorized patient relationships and commit to working within established guidelines, or you can face disciplinary action up to and including termination. You have 48 hours to decide. Elena left the meeting, feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. She had dedicated her career to helping veterans, and now she was being forced to choose between her livelihood and her principles. The decision should have been impossible, but as she thought about Marcus Thompson's progress, Captain Mitchell's breakthrough, and the dozen other veterans who depended on her care, she realized it wasn't difficult at all. The stand Elena spent the next 2 days consulting with colleagues, reviewing her employment contract, and most importantly, meeting with her veteran patients to explain the situation. Their reactions ranged from understanding to outrage, but all of them supported whatever decision she made. Doc, you've already done more for me than anyone else in the system, Marcus Thompson told her during an emergency session. If you need to step back to protect your career, I understand. But if you're willing to fight this, you've got my support. Captain Mitchell's response was more direct. This is bullshit, document. You're the only person who's helped me make real progress, and they want to shut you down because of money? That's not how we treat people who serve. Elena scheduled a meeting with Dr. Hartley on Friday afternoon to deliver her decision. She entered his office with a folder containing detailed documentation of her patients' progress, testimonials from their families, and a proposal for establishing a formal veteran mental health program at Mercy General. Dr. Hartley, I've reviewed your ultimatum, and I've made my decision, Elena began, her voice steady with conviction. I cannot in good conscience abandon patients who are making progress simply because of billing policies. These veterans deserve better from our healthcare system. Dr. Hartley's expression hardened. So you're choosing to continue your unauthorized activities? I'm choosing to honor the oath I took when I became a doctor, Elena replied. First, do no harm. Abandoning suicidal veterans because they can't pay would cause immeasurable harm. Then you leave us no choice, Dr. Hartley said, reaching for a formal document. Dr. Rodriguez, you are hereby terminated from your position at Mercy General Hospital, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. She had known this moment might come, but the reality of losing her career for doing what she believed was right hit her like a physical blow. 15 years of education, training, and service ended because she had chosen compassion over compliance. I understand, Elena said quietly, standing to leave. I hope you can sleep at night knowing you've prioritized profit over the lives of American veterans. The escort to her office was humiliating but brief. Elena collected her personal items while security guards watched, feeling like a criminal, rather than a doctor who had tried to help people. Word of her termination spread through the hospital within hours, creating a mixture of shock and support among her colleagues. The aftermath, the news of Elena's firing reached the veteran community with the speed of a wildfire. Marcus Thompson immediately contacted Captain Mitchell, who began reaching out to his military network. Within 24 hours, the story had spread throughout veteran organizations, military social media groups, and the informal networks that connected service members across the country. Elena spent the weekend in a haze of phone calls, emails, and unexpected visitors. Veterans she had treated, their families, and supporters from across the state reached out to express their outrage and offer support. Local media picked up the story, framing it as a conflict between corporate healthcare and veteran advocacy. Local doctor fired for helping veterans became a trending topic on social media, with thousands of shares and comments expressing support for Elena's actions. Veterans advocacy groups began organizing protests at Mercy General, and several politicians issued statements supporting Elena's cause, but Elena felt lost. She had sacrificed her career for her principles, and while she didn't regret the decision, she faced an uncertain future. Her savings were limited, her employment prospects were complicated by her controversial departure, and she had no clear path forward. On Monday morning, she was sitting in her small apartment, reviewing job listings and trying to figure out her next move, when she heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find Captain Mitchell standing on her doorstep, but he wasn't alone. The Brotherhood arrives. Behind Mitchell stood 6 other men, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of special operations veterans. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but their posture, their awareness, and their obvious respect for Mitchell marked them as members of the military's most elite community. Dr. Rodriguez, Mitchell said, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone delivering an important message. I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. We heard about what happened at the hospital, and we wanted to talk to you. Elena invited them into her living room, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden presence of so many intense personalities in her small space. As they settled into chairs and onto her couch, Mitchell made introductions. This is Master Chief Tom Bradley, 20-year Navy SEAL veteran. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Stevens, Army Special Forces. Sergeant Major Dave Wilson, Marine Force Recon. Chief Warrant Officer Rick Martinez, Air Force Pararescue. Staff Sergeant Joe Collins, Army Rangers. And Gunnery Sergeant Matt Harrison, Marine MARSOC. Each man nodded respectfully as he was introduced, their expressions serious but not unfriendly. Elena realized she was looking at representatives of every branch of America's special operations community. We've been talking, Master Chief Bradley said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. About what you did. For Mitchell, for Thompson, for all the veterans you've helped. And about what happened when you stood up for what was right. We have a proposition, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens added. But first, we want you to know that what you did matters. You kept faith with veterans when the system failed them. That's not something we forget. Elena felt tears threatening as she looked around the room at these warriors who had come to her door. I just did what I thought was right. I couldn't abandon patients who needed help. That's exactly why we're here, Captain Mitchell said. We don't forget people who serve, and we don't let them stand alone when they're under fire. The proposal. Over the next hour, the veterans laid out a plan that was both audacious and practical. They had been in contact with veteran networks across the country, and they had identified a significant gap in mental health services for special operations veterans. Traditional therapy approaches often failed with elite military personnel, who needed specialized care from providers who understood their unique experiences. We want to help you start your own practice, Master Chief Bradley explained. Specifically focused on special operations veterans and their families. We've already identified potential funding sources, veteran organizations, private donors, corporate sponsors who want to support military families. The demand is there, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens added. We've got guys all over the country who need what you provide. Real understanding, effective treatment, and someone who won't give up on them. Sergeant Major Wilson leaned forward, his expression intense. We've been talking to legal counsel about setting up a non-profit organization. Elite Warrior Recovery, or something similar. You'd be the clinical director, with full autonomy to treat patients according to your professional judgment. Elena felt her heart racing as she processed their proposal. They were offering her a chance to continue her work with veterans, but on her own terms, free from the bureaucratic constraints that had led to her termination. What about funding? She asked. Operating expenses, liability insurance, facility costs? We've got that covered, Chief Warrant Officer Martinez said. The special operations community takes care of its own. We've got veterans who've built successful businesses, and they're willing to invest in something that serves the community. Captain Mitchell pulled out a folder containing preliminary organizational documents. We've already started the paperwork for nonprofit status. We've identified potential office space in a medical complex that's veteran-friendly. And we've got commitments from several major corporations to sponsor the program. The decision. Elena spent the next several days reviewing the proposal, consulting with lawyers, and meeting with potential supporters. The veteran community's response was overwhelming. She received calls from across the country, from veterans who had heard about her story and wanted to support her new venture. The logistics were complex, but the veterans had thought through every detail. They had identified medical professionals willing to volunteer their time, administrative staff who could handle operations, and a network of supporters who could provide ongoing funding. More importantly, they had created a structure that would allow Elena to practice medicine on her own terms, focused entirely on serving veterans without the constraints of insurance bureaucracy or corporate profit margins. This is about more than just starting a practice, Captain Mitchell explained during one of their planning sessions. This is about creating a model that can be replicated across the country, showing that veterans can create solutions when the system fails them. Elena made her decision on a Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after she had been fired from Mercy General. She called Captain Mitchell and told him she was ready to move forward. I want to do this, she said. Not just for the veterans I've already been treating, but for all the others who need help. Let's build something that actually works. The Launch Elite Warrior Recovery officially opened its doors 6 weeks later, in a renovated medical suite that had been donated by a veteran-owned real estate company. The facility was designed specifically for military personnel, with private offices, group therapy spaces, and a comfortable waiting area that felt more like a military lounge than a medical facility. Elena's first day was both emotional and inspiring. Marcus Thompson was her first official patient, followed by Captain Mitchell and several other veterans she had been treating. But word had spread through military networks, and she soon had a waiting list of special operations veterans from across the region. The model worked better than anyone had anticipated. Elena's specialized approach, combined with the supportive environment created by the veteran community, produced remarkable results. Patients who had failed in traditional therapy programs began making significant progress, families were reunited, and lives were literally saved. The recognition. 6 months after opening Elite Warrior Recovery, Elena received a phone call that would change her life once again. The caller identified himself as Admiral William McRaven, former commander of U.S. Special Operations Command and architect of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Dr. Rodriguez, I've been following your work with Special Operations veterans. Admiral McRaven said. I'd like to invite you to speak at the Special Operations Warrior Foundation's annual conference. We want to highlight your program as a model for veteran mental health care. The invitation led to national recognition for Elena's work. She was featured in military publications, invited to speak at conferences across the country, and consulted by other organizations wanting to replicate her model, but the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Dr. Hartley, who had fired her from Mercy General, reached out to schedule a meeting. When they met at a neutral location, he was humble and direct. I made a mistake, he said simply. I was so focused on policy and procedure that I lost sight of our mission to help people. I wanted to apologize and ask if you'd consider consulting with us on developing a veteran mental health program. Elena's response was gracious but firm. I appreciate the apology, Dr. Hartley, but I found my calling. I'm exactly where I need to be. The legacy today. Elena Rodriguez runs one of the most successful veteran mental health programs in the country. Elite Warrior Recovery has expanded to multiple locations, treated thousands of veterans, and trained dozens of other mental health professionals in specialized approaches to military trauma. Captain Mitchell, now fully recovered and working as a program coordinator, often reflects on the night he first walked into Mercy General Hospital. Dr. Rodriguez didn't just save my life, he says. She showed us that sometimes the system fails, but people don't have to. Sometimes keeping faith with your principles is more important than keeping your job. The veterans who showed up at Elena's door that day have become the foundation of a movement that has transformed how America treats its military heroes. They proved that when the system fails, the warrior brotherhood endures, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not on foreign battlefields, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to do what's right regardless of the cost. Elena keeps a framed photo in her office from that first day at Elite Warrior Recovery. It shows her surrounded by the 7 special operations veterans who had appeared at her door, all of them smiling with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. The inscription reads, "To Dr. Rodriguez, who kept faith with us when no one else would. Semper Fi, always ready, never quit." In the end, Elena Rodriguez discovered that sometimes losing everything you think you want is the only way to find everything you actually need. Her willingness to sacrifice her career for her principles had created something far more valuable than any hospital position, a legacy of service that would help veterans for generations to come. The story of the doctor who was fired for helping veterans had become the story of the doctor who proved that doing what's right is always worth the cost. The end.